All right, good evening, or I guess it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Thurston Regional Housing Council meeting for April 28th. It's great to see all your faces, and thanks for remembering the time change and being here in our new meeting time. I think this will work out really well from what I'm hearing from other folks. So I'm excited about that. And so let's go ahead and do some introductions. I definitely have at least one new person here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the City of Lacey. Carolyn, can you tell us who's here?
Hi. Well, yes, we have our city manager, Scott Spence. We have council member Lenny Greenstein, and we have Kelly Adams. And is there anybody else I haven't seen yet? I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn.
You bet.
Michael Tumwater, please.
Hi, Michael Althauser, Tumwater City Council. I'm joined here by our city administrator, John Doan, as well as Brad Medrud from our planning department. And I believe Joan Cathy will be joining us as well, but might just be a minute or two late.
Michael, you also have, I think instead of Brad, you have Mike Matlock.
Oh, sorry. I just read the names.
I know, I was like, boy, that beard really changed Brad's face.
Yeah.
Thinking the same thing.
I think Brad actually, it's harder than you think to be in two places at once. So.
Hi, Brad. Oh, that's pretty good. JW, where are you from?
There we go. Well, there's only one of me, unlike Tumwater representatives. So yeah, representing Yelm and South County cities.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Carolina, can you walk us through Thurston County?
Yes, I can. I apologize. I just parked over here picking up babies, but Carolina Mejia for Thurston County Commissioner District 1. And we have Tom Webster, Keely Marino, and Jacinda. Did I miss anyone else? I don't think I did. I think I got everyone from our team.
Great, thank you. And then from Olympia, we have myself, Jim Cooper, Assistant City Manager Keith Staley, and Council Member Danny Madrone, who we are really happy to have you here and glad that the new time works for you. So wonderful. Did I miss anyone? Are we good on introductions? I didn't miss anyone. Okay, thank you. So we have a pretty packed agenda. Is everybody okay with the agenda as they see it? Okay. And then we had some notes. Any comments on the notes? Okay. Now I've lost my memory about whether we've been approving minutes because I don't see it. But oh no, there it is. I'm sorry. I skipped over public comment, but we don't have any. Carolyn.
Well, I just wanted to make sure all of you received copies of a letter that City of Lacey sent out to the members while we're talking about agenda here. And if you didn't get one, let's see if we can get one to you quickly.
Okay. Yeah, if you didn't, maybe drop that in the chat and Carolyn or someone from Lacey can forward that on. I think we have, well, item 5 around on our agenda is essentially the conversation that was laid out in the letter from Lacey in my mind. So a lot of us are on the same page. So
yep.
So then I get that takes us to public comment, just so formally. So I say we don't have anyone signed up for public comment. And I'm just looking at the attendee list in case anybody's throwing their hand up, and I don't see that. So I'm going to go ahead then and ask for a motion to approve the minutes from our March meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any conversation or amendment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And I'll just stop there and welcome County Manager Carolina Mejia. No, that's what it says on Romero Chavez's screen. So welcome, Romero.
Thank you. For some reason, I had some issues in finding the Zoom link. So she forwarded that to me. Let me change the name.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
we're doing duplicates tonight. So if anybody, no, anyway. Okay, so that takes us to Tom to do an update on the RHC interlocal agreement amendments. Keely.
Just really quickly wanted to also point out that Director of Public Health, Shelley Slaughter, has also joined us.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that because I have non-video participants off, so I need to fix that. Great. And Shelley, welcome. And if there's any good of the order updates you want to give us at the end, if we have a few minutes, we'd love that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'll go to Tom with the amendments on the interlocal agreement.
All right, thank you. So a quick update on the amendment to the Regional Housing Council interlocal agreement. You'll recall back in February and March, we discussed an amendment to add language concerning how the 1406 funds will be handled. All the jurisdictions have approved that amendment. And so this week, the amendment will be going around, the document will be going around for signature. So Hannah Miles from the city of Tumwater is assisting us in sending that out electronically for signature. So if you've not already received that from her, you should be receiving it shortly. So by next month, we should have a fully signed interlocal agreement that has been amended to include the 1406 language. So that is the update I have for you this evening.
Great. Any questions about the interlocal? Okay. And I think the only caveat to that is if we decide to do any bonding, we might need to do an amendment. Is that right, Tom?
Yes, I think we would want to revisit that to consider that issue.
Okay, great. Scott?
A technical question for Tom, and I don't know if Rick's reached out to you. There's a reporting requirement for how $1,406 are spent. Do you have the ability, since we're all theoretically combining those dollars, does the county, can they do that for all of us, or do we still need to do it individually?
Rick did ask me that question. I think that's something we need to look into and explore more in terms of how the reporting will need to happen. So I don't have the specific answer to that. I don't know if each jurisdiction will need to report the financial information and the county can consolidate a program report. So the technical council will need to explore that issue and how we handle that reporting.
Okay.
That's a good question. Anything else around the interlocal? Okay. So then the next conversation is to tee up really, and I'm going to kind of facilitate a conversation around a significant project or projects for the RHC to look at. And, you know, just give a little bit of background on the agenda item from the planning group last week with Carolina and Tom and Keely and I working with Nicole on this agenda. There's a lot of moving parts right now financially with, sort of the American Recovery Plan, we have 1406 funds. We held back, I think, $1 million or $1.5 million from our RFP for the current housing funds that the county receives. And then there's other things coming down the pike from the federal government around infrastructure and state funding for some of these things. And so what Carolina and I asked staff to do is give us a little bit of a rundown on what we know as far as those dollars and cents, so that we can have an informed conversation about what it looks like to do some projects together through this new entity we created. That's, we tried to do some projects first, and we had some trial and error around some different sites for parking, and that stimulated moving into the scattered site approach that we're piloting now between Olympia and Thurston County. And then everybody knows that there's just a massive housing need, and we have to figure out how many units, particularly permanent supportive units and shelter beds, do we need as a community at the broadest level, so that we can think about how to deploy these funds. And so I asked Tom to tell us a little bit of the numbers, the money and numbers story. And then I think it would make sense to have Carolina tell us just a little bit of the context for the Lacey letter that we received today, because I think it sets the stage for the conversation that Carolina and I were hoping we would have. we have an idea about how we want to move forward, and I'll save that for after we do these updates, and then we can open it up and see what direction people want to go. Carolina, did I do that justice?
You did. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So Tom, what do we know?
So let me share my screen so it may be helpful to put it into a visual. And so this is what I put together, and these are estimates just to share kind of around our funding resources that we know that we have, as well as what may be some potential funding sources. So our existing resources from the Home Investment Partnership Program, which is our federal, we receive approximately $700,000. That's creeped up a little bit. So maybe we're getting up close to 750, 800,000 a year annually that can be used for affordable housing. We also have our 2060, our local document recording fee that is specific to affordable housing. And we collect around 250 to 400,000 annually for that. So those are two existing resources that we've had in our community for a long time that currently go to our capital pipeline projects historically. The $1406, which is fairly new, as you all know, we're projecting we collect around 800 to 900,000 annually as a region once all the funds are pooled. That can be used for affordable housing development. It can support new operations at new permanent supportive housing units, as well as for rent assistance. And as everyone knows, those funds can be bonded. I've also listed the Olympia Home Fund, which my understanding is collects around 2.4 million per year. But if Councilmember Cooper or someone wants to correct that number, please do so. The other number, the chair indicated that we have held back approximately $1 million to $1.5 million of our 2163 document recording fee that could also be used to support an affordable housing project for one time. Some of that money, we're going to see what our scattered sites project is going to require. So that's why there's a little uncertainty around exactly how much will be available. So those are our existing funding sources. The potential funding sources that I've listed here is one, if there was a countywide home fund, that would collect approximately $4.5 to $4.8 million annually. Once again, I want to indicate that this doesn't indicate that the commissioners have taken any action or plan to take any action on the home fund, but if they did, that is approximately what it would collect. For the American Rescue Plan Act, based on preliminary discussions that I've been told about, your councils may have updated numbers, and so if anyone has corrections to these, please make those corrections, is that the county has identified approximately $5 million that could support a housing project. Olympia has indicated around 1.3 million, City of Tumwater 1 million, and Lacey has indicated a willingness to support, but I've not heard a dollar amount from their American Rescue Plan funds towards a housing project. Also wanted to point out in the recent state budget that was passed, there was a line item for rapid capital acquisition. And my understanding is they put aside $120 million to provide financial assistance for rapid capital acquisition for the purchase of or rent of real property for quick conversion into homeless or emergency shelter, permanent supportive housing, or affordable housing for low-income folks. So there's some additional state dollars that are tied to affordable housing beyond what's in the trust fund and other funding sources that we're still learning about. So that was a new source. So those were the sources that I was aware of that I put together tonight. So I don't know if anyone has anything to add or any corrections to that information.
Welcome, Joan.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Michael, and then Carolyn.
So for the doc recording fee amounts on here, is that reflective of the current doc recording fee, or is that does that reflect the increase the legislature passed this year? Because they passed a pretty huge increase to the doc fee. Like, didn't they increase it by like $100 or something like that?
They did. So this includes does not include the new document recording fee. And my understanding, I have not read that legislation recently, is that document recording fee is intended to go for rent assistance. So I'm not sure if it's intended to be used for affordable housing development. I think it's focused on rent assistance. I don't know what the flexibility is around that. So So this does not incorporate that, and we need to learn more about what that all incorporates and what's allowed under that new document recording fee.
Okay, thanks.
Carolyn?
I heard briefly that there was another $3 million coming the county's way. That was, this was right toward the end of the legislative session. And I didn't know whether that might be this fund you were talking about, the rapid capital acquisition, or perhaps another.
My understanding is that you'll need to apply for that rapid capital acquisition. So I think it would be something different. I'm not familiar with what you're referencing. I don't know if Ramiro or anyone else from the county is familiar with what that $3 million would be, but I do not believe it would be for this capital acquisition, which is I understand would be a competitive process.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Tom, I thought you knew everything.
What's up?
You're breaking my heart.
Sorry.
So I will throw out that Olympia is only looking at programming our first payment currently. And that's not an approved number by the council, but it's what our finance committee is recommending to the council. We're kind of holding our second year payment right now as all of it is to be determined. So I think there might be some opportunity there depending on what we come up with. Keith, I see your hand as well while I'm on Olympia.
Yeah, I was going to say something basically the same. And, there's going to be another almost $50 million, $40 million in the system next year. That's enough to build a single project, at least one single project, depending on how we would agree to move that forward. So to me, that's a really good pot of money to be talking about for a project, is next year's ARP funds. What are we going to do with those? How are we going to make another project in our community happen? We need all of the supportive housing that we can get, and another $20 million will get us another 60 to 70 unit facility. And that, again, just begins to scratch the surface about what the need is.
Thank you, Keith. Michael and then Ramiro.
Thanks. My question is about the ARP also. John, do you know if the 1 million that we put for ours, like I think the ballpark we were doing for this was about 20% of what Tumwater is receiving for ARP, but is that total? So would that be 1 million over the 2 installments for ours, John?
Correct. It's over the 2 installments. So whether it would come out of the first or the second, I don't know that we know that yet, but it is based on the 20% of the total amount.
And I guess, so to follow up, and Ramiro, if your hand was up next, maybe you could also answer this. Is the 5 million from Thurston County just from the first tranche, or is that including both the way that we sort of broke it down? What does that dollar figure represent?
Thank you. Yeah, that is the first allocation for this year. However, we are making some decisions to start obligating some of the money for next year. So I know that Keith stated there's going to be this much money in the system, but there's also other needs the county needs to address with the second allocation. But there is an opportunity for the board to consider on the second allocation to add to this $5 million. That's yet to be seen. But again, the second allocation that is coming next year is intended also to address other needs the county has.
Okay. So any other clarifications on any of the funds? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Carolyn to talk about the Lacey context, why it's to be determined. Okay, Carolyn.
All righty. Well, if you, sorry, I'm dropping my glasses here. There we go. If you saw our letter, it is meant to get this conversation going and identify the things that we need to look at, considerations that need to be addressed, and the information we really need to have in order to make good decisions going forward. we had a council discussion recently, and I believe there's a sentiment among at least the majority of council members that this is money we're not likely to see this big a pot coming our way anytime soon again after the ARPA runs its course, and that we need to go big, and that we need to have short range and long range plans for expending that money. And with our collective funding, that we really have the opportunity to do that. So one of the questions, if you're looking at your letter, is what would be the time frame to construct or acquire the number of housing units identified, and how soon can we come to an agreement about what the needs are, where the funding would come from, and move forward from there. So I think this is our just interest in trying to move things along, if you will. Scott, do you want to add anything, or Lenny, you want to add to that?
Yeah, please. So, we recently had our council retreat, and this was one of 3 topics that we took up a full day, quite a few hours on. So our council, and I don't want to speak for the council, there's been no votes taken or anything like that, but the majority certainly of our council is thinking in terms of big, like much bigger than the numbers that I was just seeing on the screen from the different jurisdictions. We were thinking, and what we think is, it's a huge sum of money that we'll never see from the federal government again, right? This is a one-time thing, never going to happen. How do we use that money to really make a serious dent in what's probably the biggest problem we have as a region, homelessness right now? So our thinking, and what we've talked about, is putting the vast majority of that money. So, we're getting 11.45 or whatever it is, and I don't know what everyone's getting in each city, but I know it's substantial money. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of almost $80 million, I think, across the county over the 2-year period. Our thinking was the vast majority of that money going to the capital expense of actually getting beds, whether it be by purchasing existing or building, preferably purchasing, because we think we can do that a lot less expensively where available. But that was kind of our thought, is permanent supportive housing, and the vast majority of this money going into a major project.
Okay.
Hundreds of beds. We're talking hundreds of beds at one shot.
Right. And if I could add too, I mean, and it was really great that Tom was able to provide what he did just before this part of the meeting. But I think it's really incumbent upon this group to look at the different funding sources and make sure that these dollars that are coming in now, we don't duplicate or spread ourselves thin that way. So let's look at the best ways to fund the things that we want to do and make sure that we're making the most of this.
Okay. Scott?
Yeah, I would just add it, and to Councilmember Cox and Councilmember Greenstein's point, I mean, the council's very serious about how do we deal with one of our most pressing issues. And it seems every time we have a conversation collectively about how do we deal with the homeless situation, permanent supportive housing, how do we get more affordable units, it's always been a factor of money. So now we have this window of opportunity where we are getting this American Rescue Plan Act funds. How do we best combine those funds, leverage state and federal dollars, and make some meaningful progress on a problem that has been, in a sense, challenging us for really a better part of the decade. So I think again, we really want to have a concerted discussion effort and identify what is the need, what's the number of units that we can do for permanent supportive housing, what does that cost? Let's identify all the partners. Can we get an action plan in place, and let's try to advance this and try to solve a problem that maybe is within sight in terms of actually getting people housed.
Okay. Any questions for Lacey? And I'm going to tee this up, Keely, because I want to just ask you to talk before we open up the discussion about what we know within the current coordinated entry system that might help us with this conversation. But any other questions for Lacey around that concept? So I would just lift up a similar comment to what Romero said about the county is, yes, it's a big problem and it's a huge deal regionally. And from Olympia's standpoint, we've also, you know, been investing significantly. Our taxpayers having this conversation, and we know we need to do more. You know, so that's why we're not putting all of our eggs in that basket at the moment, because we have other channels like the county does. That just to throw that out there so folks understand. I think, you know, Lenny, to your point, you know, I think we're going to get 10.6 between the 2 years. So 20% in the first payment. And, you know, Keith, you know, it's probably conceivable, Keith, to say that we might do more depending on what this group comes up with in the second payment, maybe.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Keely, before we open it up, can you help us with context around what we know around numbers and what we need to know?
Yeah, I can definitely do my best. So currently in our system, in terms of emergency shelter beds, we have 335. Now those are numbers that are also inclusive of cold weather beds. So during the not cold weather season, we have approximately 295 currently, which is about 100 less or so than we've had in the past. And that's of course due to social distancing within, moving away from non-congregate sheltering. So that's the number of beds that we have. Most of all of those shelters are operating at 95 to 100% capacity. Just some context there. So of course, everyone's seen the PIT numbers. PIT numbers counted 995 folks unsheltered in our county. However, we all know that the PIT is an undercount. And if we go into each respective coordinated entry providers' individual data of who's coming in, it's significantly higher number. So with families, well, I do not have the specific numbers currently right now in front of me about how many people Family Support Center saw, but it was nearly 2,000 individuals in the households that they saw just in the past fiscal year. Also, we know that about approximately 60% of the individuals that are on the street could be considered and categorized as chronically homeless. And we also know that chronically homeless is often indicated towards permanent supportive housing, which is a much more expensive program, but a very essential program to ensure that those housing placements remain permanent and those folks remain supported in their housing placements in order to maintain their housing placements. In pretty much across the board for the last number of years, we have in our data, which I'm happy to send out to the RHC, we've included all this data in previous Regional Housing Council meetings. We capture approximately how many households are entering our system and how many are exiting. So it averages around 500 or so individuals enter our system, which means these individuals have come into contact with an agency within our system that is using the homeless management information system as our data. That's where we're getting the data. About 500 unique households enter every quarter of the year. And of course, during COVID, we saw a significant decrease in exits, just for obvious reasons. However, excuse the cat.
They want to talk too.
Yeah, he's very vocal. He feels very strongly about homelessness. He's got really great ideas. He actually has a solution, and I don't understand him. So if anyone speaks cat, let me know. We're good. Across the last couple of years, when we look at quarterly data and annual data of where people are exiting to from our system, we have a number of individuals, like a percentage between 20-40% that move into emergency shelter programs, a number of them under 20% often returning to homelessness, a pretty vacillating number of percentage of folks moving into rapid rehousing programs, so getting rehoused. 2% for the last several years of everyone entering our system are exiting into permanent support or permanent housing or permanent supportive housing. 2%. It's a major, major bottleneck. And it has been for many years, and ever more so now with COVID. And then, however, there are a number of projections that have come up in the last years for how we might anticipate more individuals ending up homeless after the eviction moratoriums end. I do believe, there's a lot of many resources going into our system right now to prevent that. However, there is an inevitable number of individuals that will not be able to be served by those dollars and will end up on the street. So just some context. We do have, of course, projects coming on board in the next year. Interfaith Works in Lehigh's 2828 Martin Way, which will be providing more shelter beds and permanent supportive housing. But we have just Drexel House as our permanent supportive housing right now as our main project providing permanent supportive housing. That's about 85 beds. We have a few others scattered throughout, but that's the main permanent supportive housing project. And of course, serving our most vulnerable here in single adults here in Thurston County. So definitely a need. Also very important to say that when we're talking about lots of money coming into our system, we're in the middle. Tomorrow, we're determining going through our review process for the RFP for the $3 or so million we can give out. And there's $8 million in asks, and every single one of those asks is an essential service, essential to our system. So $5 million ostensibly of asks will go unfunded. So just to keep our system as it exists now whole, we have a tremendous gap. So just putting that out there when we're talking about lots of money coming into the system.
That was an amazing off-the-cuff answer. Thank you very much for that. Such a gem. So I think that's we can do a better analysis in a planning process to put meat behind what Keely's talking about. But I'll just throw out, it matches really closely when we were doing the home fund, in Olympia. Like, how do we set a goal knowing that we can't do it all? And so we take the point in time count and double it. And it sounds like with COVID, maybe even triple it. And then 60% of those 2,000 to 3,000 people need permanent supportive housing, right? So we can start to get to the calculus of the need. And then to Lacey's point, how much, I like the way Scott framed it. What do we know? Who are the partners? What do they bring? And then what's the gap, right? So that we can figure out, what that might look like. So I want to, just open it up and, I'll tell you just roughly what Carolina and I were thinking. And then as a starting point for the conversation is we would like to come away from today with a 2-person subcommittee that will work with the technical team to essentially bring back the short and long-term, contextualized plan that's really similar to what the city of Lacey is asking for. And that would include everything we know about and maybe a proposal around what other potential funding sources we could bring to the table. So does that, I'm going to go to Carolina because she helped formulate that idea and consider that the open table for a discussion. And we have about a half an hour. And I think if we needed a couple more minutes, we could pull that off as well. So what do folks think? Carolina?
Yes, so actually this is something that Tom and Keely came up with a plan that I looked over and I agreed with it so much. I think they did such a wonderful job in coming up with what a subcommittee we're looking at. And for me, it's just helping community groups help us come up with innovative and creative ideas that maybe we're not seeing. And we've seen other subcommittee groups be able to do that, and Tom and Keely came up with kind of the task and just kind of the breakdown of what all of that looks like. Tom, do you think you can send that to the RHC?
Yeah, I can send that out after this meeting.
Perfect.
If you like.
Okay. Go ahead.
When you talk about are you talking about forming an entity similar to like how we had the siting committee and had a funding committee? This would be a new one similar to that, right? I guess I'm just a little confused about sort of the structure and how it relates to those other committees. And yeah, I don't know. What do you?
Yeah, so
proposing about that.
the short answer to that is an ad hoc committee that's moving more quickly based on what we know already, and trying to churn out a product and bring it back and then sunset. You know, the challenge being that all the other committee workload is big enough that it's hard to fit it into one of those pockets at the moment.
How many total members are you looking for on this group?
Well, we have 5 formal members, and so we can't have more than 2 of the primaries, right? So it'd be okay to have an alternate or 2 on there as well without, you know, creating a quorum of the RHC. But really 2 formal members and maybe 1 or 2 other that are from the alternate pool.
And just so I understand, their task is to look at the questions that were laid out in the Lacey letter and try to come up with some answers to those in coordination with the 5-year plan to sort of come back to us about parameters for what a big project along those lines would look like. Is that, am I following?
Yeah, so I think it's projects, frankly, like
Projects.
like, you know, what can we do, and we can get more formal, but what can we do with the existing pipeline? Like, what do we know? And then what can we add on with this, you know, unique moment in times, extra funding? And then what would other long-term funding look like so we can get to some sort of, and I think in Olympia, help me Keith, that the Olympia home fund plan was in our packet, but we have a 300 unit goal in 5 years, is that right?
Correct. And we're 120 units into that process right now.
But something like that gives us a target. You know, I think the challenge for me is, you know, people are throwing around the number 800 or 1,000 units. And when I look at the calculus, you know, that costs as much as a whole county courthouse. And so I don't think that we're going to be able to do that, you know, short term. We might be able to do that long term by making projects grow with seed money. But if we're spending all of our money on the total of the project, which won't hardly ever be the case, it's going to be a real challenge. In fact, I figured it out. If we did a home fund and that was the only funding source, it would take us 70 years. So I think an achievable goal. Carolyn?
So what would it take for us to have the capacity to either bond or borrow, but finance somehow these things so that we can leverage money and not just dump all our cash?
I think that's part of the dynamic that needs to be figured out for sure. I think generally all of the funding sources allow it as long as we can, you know, put up the collateral.
Yeah.
Right. Whoever's credit card is going to go on. Keith, and then Carolina.
I was just going to say the ARP funds have to be spent by 3 years. So, you know, those are not bondable, but 1406 and certainly a home fund and a county-wide home fund could be bondable at a much higher rate than, you know, than other sources, than Olympia going solo, for example, or our $1406. The other thing that we need to always remain cognizant of is these facilities are not self-perpetuating and self-operating, particularly permanent supportive housing. And we need to look at and associate both the cost of construction or acquisition and the cost of operation. We're fortunate that we've pooled our $1406. They're great for operations. But that I think should be another charge, and, you know, obviously was included in the Lacey letter. You know, what can we afford to operate? It's not just what we can afford to build, but we also have to think about what we can afford to operate going forward.
Yeah, so we don't have empty shells sitting around. Good point.
Yeah.
Carolina?
So, you know, when me and Jim talked, you know, the whole goal for this is we need at least an idea or a general plan that we need to go after. And we're currently pulling staff in 5 different directions of, you know, what we all see as the solution. And I think that the main goal of the RHC is to have one vision and one mission in place and to go forward with that. And that's what I see, you know, this subcommittee trying to achieve for us, just breaking it down for all of us and really finding that path forward. Because, you know, at this rate, I feel we're going to not be able to invest in a big idea, which is the goal, right? It's to invest in something big. And instead, we're going to be doing little projects here and there that are really not going to have an adequate answer to what the need is.
Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, I guess I sort of hear two things in that. Like, it sort of makes sense to me that there would be, you know, an entity looking at multiple projects. I mean, if we're talking about trying to get to functional zero, which Councilmember Greenstein, I think that's what you were getting at, is where we can get to a system where I think advocates describe it as a yes to yes system, where you say, yes, I want a bed, and then the system says, yes, I can accommodate you. I have capacity. The system has capacity to provide a bed. So it makes sense to me that if we were trying to do that, that there would be, you know, a team to sort of get the ball rolling. But when I think about like how that would be possible, it seems like we would have to have multiple projects and multiple sites. Like, I'm not even sure we would want to do 1,000 units in one spot. That seems like that would be not a good thing. So it makes sense that there would be, you know, someone to get the ball rolling, but I think that we should, I mean, we're here, right? I think we should have geographic diversity in this too. Like, we should be looking at projects in all of our jurisdictions as well, as opposed to, I'm pretty sure our friends in Olympia wouldn't say, let's throw it in downtown.
We just funded a home fund project in Tumwater.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, I think it makes sense. And I do want to make sure that when we are talking about going big, that we're not locked into the idea of going big on one single site, but are talking about going big in terms of addressing systemic capacity and the ability to achieve that system, no matter where it is geographically.
Right. Yeah. In my mind, as you're talking, it's what does that pipeline look like long term? So I'm gonna go to Romero and then Lenny.
Thank you. As I listen to the conversation in the subcommittee is a great idea. But I believe what we're talking about is a work plan. And that has been always the objective of the RHC, to come up with a work plan. What is the short term, midterm, and long term? And I believe the work plan needs to include projects, operations, and maintenance, and all that encompassing. And I think this is the right time to start putting some thought on this work plan, because if this subcommittee is concentrated on a single project, I believe we're going to miss an opportunity. As Commissioner Mejia stated, I think we need to broaden that perspective and have a deliverable that really give us a perspective in the next 20 years, if that is the case. And that is probably the fundamentals of a work plan, as I believe. And when this group approves a work plan, then the next step is how we're going to be implemented it. And that becomes part of our the next steps. So
I like the length of the horizon you just put in front of us. Lenny?
I was just going to add to what Michael was saying. I totally agree. And I don't think anyone, even though we were talking going big, I don't think we necessarily meant a single project with 1,000, you know, beds in one spot. So no, multiple locations, purchasing existing locations, all of that, but just trying to really get to the point like you described, you know, the yes to yes, right? Actually doing something significant enough that it has an impact. I just don't believe band-aiding it at a few units at a time, we're ever going to make a dent in the real problem. it's got to be big. And I think this is really the best and maybe only opportunity we'll ever have with enough capital to really go big.
Scott?
You know, I guess the other thing, I think we all agree that we need a sort of a path forward or a plan, but I think there's also just there's a sense of urgency, and there are federal dollars out there, state dollars. If we do not have our collective ask figured out, then we're going to miss those opportunities to best leverage those dollars. And so, again, I think there was a time frame in the letter talking about a 45 to 60 days. There's some way we can again, not to oversimplify the problem, but what is those number of units that we're going to be able to get to a system that we all agree that is beneficial to this problem? And then how do we best work through that through multiple projects, the partners, et cetera? And then how do we, in a sense, maintain what we build or acquire? What's the best opportunity to actually leverage those dollars? So again, there's just that sense of how do we accomplish this goal? And then not saying we don't have time, but there is a window there that we can't take so much time that we're going to miss out on federal and state dollars.
So we're getting some chat from one of our great housing experts, Meg Martin, and I want to just lift that up that, you know, she's talking about, can this be built off of existing plans? And I think absolutely, that's, you know, the first step is what do we already know? And then where do we fill that in? So Keely, and then I want to try and see if I want to try and make space for JW, Joan, or Danny if they have any comments.
I was going to do the same thing, Jim. I was just going to uplift that and just say there are a number of plans, and we have unfunded projects that are within that plan now. And so just not negating the plan that we have, or plans in that process. So I was just going to say the same thing.
Cool. Thank you. So I just want to provide space for the folks who haven't had a comment, because I know some of us can consume it.
Well, I'll jump in, Jim, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I'm hearing the first part of the conversation, it sounded like what we needed was something like, I don't know, a regional housing council. Sorry, Jim. I timed that just right when you had that glass of water to your mouth. We are here. These are the people that I see on here, the people who have been most involved, the organizations that have been most involved in trying to figure this problem out for the better part of a decade. As you say, we do have projects on the work plan. And I think the work of this committee, this council, should be to start putting some dollars to those plans that we already have in place, because as Scott says, this is a limited window of opportunity for us to climb through. And each one of those plans should already come with the cost of long-term maintenance of that program, right? And who would run it? If not, that's the second part of it. And I think we could spend pretty much all of the money that we see coming in right now with the projects that have been identified. The other thing that I would think, and then I'll shut up, is that there are lots of other people out there in our community who we have not heard from and who might have the great idea. They just didn't know who to ask, and perhaps it would be reasonable to consider sending out, you know, not necessarily an RFP, but an RFI, request for ideas, on what else we could do locally now to help solve this problem with the monies that we're getting.
Right. Well, I think, you know, my gut reaction to your comment is like, what private sector properties are not working with the funding that entity has and could be an opportunity for a partnership. Good comments. Anyone else? Other thoughts? Anything else? Keely, is that a new hand or is it from before? Okay. So is that a general, I mean, I'm not hearing anyone say don't form a subcommittee. Tom, are you able to, Tom, go ahead.
I'll say, in thinking about that, kind of carrying on that, one question I would have for the group in terms of if a subcommittee is going to be formed is we can include the technical team, representatives of this. Is it appropriate to include some community members, some developers, some other affordable housing experts, folks from, you know, who have lived experience? You know, is it appropriate to include a limited number of of folks from outside of the Regional Housing Council as part of that subcommittee would be a question for the group.
Anybody think that's a bad idea?
This is Shelley. I would just add that I think that is one of the reasons why we are required to have a continuum of care. So we should definitely make sure that we're leveraging the community members and organizations that are already part of that group.
Yeah, and that's where my mind went to, Shelley. In the dialogue that's happening in the community around a county home fund, the question is, who would be the advisory committee like Olympia has? And, maybe that continuum of care or some subset of the hat, would already be set up to fit that role. So Tom, I think, yes, some representation, at least from that group. But Keely's the chair of that, right? Carolyn? Oh, sorry.
I think it's very important that we be inclusive. My only concern is that the group not get so big that it becomes a big time sink and it takes forever to get to the thing. I think we need to be pretty nimble with this process.
Right.
And so how can we accomplish both?
Right. Yeah, because we want to move in real time on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So people that, might be nerdy enough to go to RHC meetings and send cool chats that already know the system.
Meg.
Danny.
In terms of leveraging other funding sources, is there some kind of time frame we should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, I mean, see, maybe Tom or Keith has a response to that.
I would add the biggest one is the Housing Trust Fund for the state and Low Income Housing Tax Credits, the LIHTC. And so there's the process and application process for those. Usually it's a 2-phased application process. And Jacinda may be able to help me out with some of the dates and when those typically happen, but there tends to be one in the summer and then in the fall. So, but there's an annual cycle. Those are the two biggest sources of leverage that for affordable housing is through the state, the Housing Trust Fund and the tax credit process.
LIHTC, I believe, is usually around January. And then Housing Trust Fund, there are 2 stages in summer, fall. I think around October, if I'm remembering correctly, is that second stage.
Yeah, and then what is the ARP funds? We have 3 years from the date of the first payment, right?
Yeah. Which sounds like a long time, but isn't.
No, and thankfully we asked for more pipeline applicants in this cycle.
Yeah, right.
Keely?
So one more thing, I just want to reiterate a little what Director Slaughter said earlier, that we are mandated from the state to have a local continuum of care to do these. So it's not just another group, it is actually a mandate from the state. And so we don't want to circumvent that or bypass that. That's incredibly important in terms of us maintaining a good relationship with our funders. So just want to put that out there.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's how you really leverage, right? Good. So then I guess the question, oh, Scott?
Well, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So I guess next steps, how do we continue to go down a flight path that we can actually meet our goals that we're talking about?
Yes. So that was exactly where I was going is, I'll volunteer to sit on that unless people want it more, but it'd be nice to have 2 members from the committee, and then we can figure out what the right structure of the staff support is so we don't get too duplicative. with everyone from all of the jurisdictions having to sit around the table. But this body will choose who this group is. So is there anyone else that's interested in doing some extra work for maybe a 2 to 4 month run?
I'd be willing to be an alternate.
Okay. Lenny?
I'm willing to do it.
Okay. Carolina?
I don't know if it would be appropriate. So I think either you or me should do it, Jim. But not both of us, now that Lenny's volunteered. So if you're willing to do it, then I can be an alternate too, same as Carolyn.
Okay. So if Carolina and Carolyn are alternates, Lenny's also, they're both primaries for their jurisdiction. Lenny's an alternate. So Michael, would you join me in this too?
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
That
Okay,
sounds
so
great.
so the committee would be Michael and I and Lenny, with Carolyn and Carolina as alternates if Michael or I can't make it. Should we have an alternate for Lenny too, given the dynamics of the quorum? I think that my thought is we need to just schedule it when it works for us and make it work. So. Okay. So I think that's a good start. And what I'll ask then is, Tom, can you help us like this week start thinking about a schedule cycle that will get us so we can report back every month to the full RHC? Okay. Anything else top of mind, Scott?
So I guess can staff join elected officials just to be part of that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll leave that to the technical team to tell us what staff do we need to be sitting there, what frameworks do we have already started that we can, kind of combine into. And I think I really like, and we can talk about this as the committee, but the way Romero framed this of, this is the 20-year work plan for the RHC, and here's the 5-year lever decision points or whatever that is. To keep it moving to a bigger picture. Keely?
I just want to give some perspective that our continuum of care is anywhere between 5 and 20 members on that continuum of care. And I just want to draw attention to the unwieldiness potentially of this subcommittee with, because that's a rather large group. So.
Okay. Yeah, let's form and then add, if that makes sense, so we can talk through those dynamics in a small group and then figure out who to invite to join us. Does that make sense, Keely?
Yes, as long as there are members of the continuum of care on that initial group.
Okay.
We need the experts at the table, the people that have been doing this for their entire careers, to be at the table at the beginning of this conversation.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So can you give us a name or two that we should invite to our first meeting, either now or offline?
Absolutely. I nominate Meg for sure, and because she's on the call. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's start out that way. And all in favor of Meg, please cheer. There you go, Meg. So and really, based on workload, we'll figure out who's right for that. So, okay. So that I'm going to move us then to the technical team report out. So we're going to start with Keith around the scattered site conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Cooper. The RHC technical team has continued to meet and discuss how to move the scattered site program forward. We're working with our friends at the county to develop an interlocal agreement to facilitate that work. The city of Olympia will be considering some budget amendments on May 4th to fund our component of that work, which will be essentially expanding our ability to manage those sites. So that is moving forward, I think, in a good direction. I'll let Tom and Keely speak to the RFP process for the case management aspect of that program. I'm really excited about this program, and I think we can have a tremendous impact, and it can be one of those bridge activities that can move us from where we are to when we start seeing more housing come on board that will give us ever more options to move people into. So that's the grand plan, if you will. And Keely or Tom, do you want to speak to the status of the RFP for case management?
Yeah, so briefly, the commissioners approved us moving forward with issuing an RFP for the case management component. And so we have done that. So the RFP has been issued, it's out on the street. Proposals are due May 12th. So we're looking forward to receiving some good proposals. And then based on what we receive, we'll kind of evaluate those and make a plan for going forward. So that we continue to move forward. And as Keith said, we're also working on drafting that interlocal agreement between the county and Olympia for those funds. So next steps are being taken.
So are you looking for an expandable contract? So what I'm thinking is, like, you know, we get a few months into the pilot and it's really clear, and Lacey and Tumwater or even Yelm want to participate with a site in their community. Will we bring on a vendor that's able to do that?
Yes, and so part of the RFPs we requested for a price for the 3 identified sites, and then we're asking for a separate price for if there was an additional site based on an estimate of so many folks in that site, what would be an additional cost, with that to be negotiated based on the specific site. But we have asked for that within the budget for what it would cost to add additional sites.
Great. Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, are you doing eviction and rental assistance too, Keith?
I am not.
Anybody have any updates there?
Tom probably can.
Yeah, I can do a quick update on rental assistance at least. And I may look at Keely and I'll try to pull up my numbers. So the county has issued contracts with Community Action Council for our rental assistance dollars, for the Treasury rental assistance dollars. We've also are in the process just finalizing a contract with Community Youth Services to implement rental assistance as well. So they have started taking applications. And if you give me 1 second, unless Keely, you have those numbers handy. I will tell you what they've reported in their first.
I do.
You have those? Great. Can you report those?
Since they were able to take appointments, so they opened the scheduler on the 7th of April and they started scheduling on the 12th of April. They've gone through all the people that were on their wait list, which I believe was upwards of 300 individuals. They've called everyone on the wait list. They're utilizing 1406, the original ERAP dollars and the TRAP to ensure that all of those funds are spent out. They have, at this point, they have 123 households that have gone 100% approved, checks are cut. There's 140 households in process. They've made 967 appointments already to get folks served. They've spent in rent assistance about $708,000 already in the first 2 weeks, and about $5,000 in utilities. And then today we heard from CYS, and they just started. So they've got 6 approved young people, fully checks cut, everything, 7 in process, 7 appointments. They spent about $66,000 in rental assistance and about $400 or $500 in utilities. So they're moving right along.
And I'll say I heard that largely that was the private utilities that are getting funded. So the, you know, cable and power companies versus the city water and sewer, which was interesting to me. Any questions for Tom and Keely on that? Okay, the RFP, Tom.
All right, so the RFP, as Keely indicated earlier, many of you are busy reading applications, or I hope you're busy reading applications. So that process is moving forward. So a quick update on what we have received. So we received 7 applications for the basic needs projects. Those are the local human service funds, the old HHSC dollars. We received 8 applications for housing basic needs. We received 6 capital applications, and we received 26 applications for homeless services. And as Kelly indicated, the asks are much higher than the dollar amounts that we have available to fund. So the committees will have some very difficult decisions to bring to you, or recommendations to bring to you for funding. Did want to highlight a couple things that the RFP funding group talked about. One is we did have to, and this is a new development, one application we have had to reject it. It turned out to be a duplicate application of another one submitted. So it turned out to be kind of a non-responsive application. One applicant has submitted their paperwork to be a formal IRS approved nonprofit organization. That paperwork they're still waiting for their official approval from the IRS. So the committee decided to move forward with their application, with the understanding that if they received an award, that they would need to have their IRS designation before a contract would be issued for those funds. That award would be kind of rescinded. There was a couple other applications that we had to make some administrative allowances to kind of correct some paperwork and some things like that. So wanted to be open and transparent that we did allow a few of what we considered administrative fixes to some applications. For the RFI process for looking at those capital projects for 3 years down the road, we initially received 3 applications. We did end up rejecting one application for being non-responsive. It was incomplete. It did not submit responses to all the questions for the application. So we had some discussion, and on a 4-to-1 vote, the committee agreed not to move that forward because it was not in compliance following the rules that were laid out in the RFI, that an incomplete application would not be reviewed. Everyone know that we made that decision. So there was 2 RFI applications that have moved forward for review. And so next month, the review team is working to review the homeless service applications. Your RFP elected officials are reviewing the basic needs and housing basic needs applications. That group is going to be meeting on May 10th. They will have an epic meeting to hear all those recommendations, make decisions on recommendations that they will then bring to this group for your May meeting. So for the May meeting, the bulk of the time will be devoted to reviewing the recommendations on funding awards before they go ultimately to the county commissioners for final approval, as outlined in our interlocal agreement. So that's kind of where the RFP process is. So happy to answer any questions about that.
Danny? You're muted.
I hit the button, I swear. Tom, I just wanted to clarify, I think it was a 3-to-1 vote for the one that we decided to reject because one member was not there. So is that correct?
Yeah, I believe you. Thank you for that clarification.
For the record.
Thank you. Jacinda, is your hand up?
Just wanted to quickly add, as co-chair of the affordable housing team, who also reviews these applications and then provides their recommendation to the review team, then forwards on to the Regional Housing Council. That team did want to pass on that they would like the Regional Housing Council to consider that 3rd application as an alternative if the other 2 projects were not able to move forward.
Okay. So Tom, can you take that back to the funding group?
Yeah, that information was provided to the funding group.
Okay. So I was curious, how many applications, if any, did we receive for the new senior set aside we did?
1.
Okay. Cool. So I don't know if there's any discussion we need to have about the incomplete applications now, or if we should do that when we're looking at the recommendations. I don't know if any of the members of that committee have any additional thoughts that we need to talk about now. Okay. Okay, so I think then we're moving on to the communications report. Kelly, can you promote Megan Porter? Okay, Megan, welcome.
Good evening. Megan Porter, and I am the lead for the communications team, and I just want to provide you a brief update on the communications plan. Last Friday, the communications team met to finalize the plan, which will reflect activities that we expect to complete through the end of this year. The intent of the plan is to work towards establishing the identity of the Regional Housing Council in the community. Some of the highlights of the plan includes a new website, which has already been developed and is in production. An article in Thurston Talk this summer to just talk about what the Regional Housing Council is. Pitching stories or sending news releases to the local media as different milestones are met or as the council requests. Write-ups to highlight the subcommittees that are working on all the different aspects of the work plan. Sharing information through all of the jurisdiction's social media platforms, holding panel discussions and town halls with the stakeholders, and then developing a plan to reach out to community groups and festivals and markets in 2022. Another thing that we're working on is providing the council with maybe a couple options for a logo so that we have some kind of visual element to go with the branding for the council. That will come probably within the next month or so. We started to discuss some performance measures, and since we currently don't have anything to measure against, really, we don't have any baselines, we're going to use the rest of this year to develop some of those baselines. So the next communications plan will have some performance measures included in it. After this meeting, I'll ask Nicole to send the draft plan or finalized plan out to all of you so you have an opportunity to review as well. Pending any questions, that's all I have.
Questions for Megan? Thank you, Megan, for thinking with the team about how to give us an identity. I know we're all lacking that. Good work.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so that takes us to good of the order. I'll save Shelley for last. I just have one item, and that's to add that as part of Olympia's community, or sorry, ARP funding, we are actually setting aside the funding to look at forgiving those utility bills that are unpaid this year. So in our conversation, that is as much about prevention of more homelessness as it is about helping those families individually in our community. So I just want to throw that out as context for part of how we're thinking about our approach to the ARP funds. So other good of the order items, Lenny.
Jim, just to jump onto what you just said, actually, make sure before you commit those dollars that you look at all of the other fund sources. We just had a briefing from our federal lobbyist, and there's a bunch of other sources involved in that same bucket of money that are not the direct allocations to us. And one of them is utilities, paying utility bills and utility relief. So just before you spend the allotment you're getting, make sure, as a city, you look at all of those other buckets. There's a lot of buckets of money out there.
Yeah, and if you have any specifics that you could send our way, it'd be good to, I hadn't heard about that, so it'd be good to know.
I don't know if Scott, but you probably, the PowerPoint presentation that we received from our federal lobbyist, some of those slides would probably be beneficial to you.
Okay.
So I don't know if we can share that, Scott, with them.
Yeah, I can send that to Jay.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lenny. Yeah, I think that's one of the things we're doing is we're making a plan, but kind of going to go slow on spending because there's a lot of moving parts, and frankly, we don't have the rules yet, right? Cool. Yeah. Other good of the order items. Updates. Okay, Shelley, tell us about the thing that consumes your time and what we need to know.
Well, we have a declared public health homeless crisis and a COVID-19 pandemic at the same time. So it's amazing to see all of you and your commitment and leadership on all of these issues right now. And really probably what many of you are interested to hear is how are we doing with COVID-19 and vaccines. And our COVID-19 cases have been going up, but today they went down a little bit. So that's quite encouraging. We're at 173 on the governor's dashboard. We don't want to get over 200 by May 3rd. Hospitalizations have gone up, so that's been a concern, and our test positivity rate is beyond 5% now. So there's a lot of COVID out there right now. We're really concerned about that. We want people to keep on masking and distancing and get vaccinated. We have administered 198,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines in Thurston County. 30% just about of our population is fully vaccinated at this point. So that's really, really great news. It was, I think, 29% earlier today. So that's good, but we're starting to see our appointments decline. We're starting to see that vaccine hesitancy creep up on us. And so anything that all of you can do in your leadership positions to help get the message out and share how important it is to get vaccinated, we would very much appreciate it. We are also focusing a lot of our efforts on community-based vaccine clinics, pop-ups, mobile clinics. Olympia Free Clinic and Providence are working on vaccinating unsheltered people in encampments, and we at Public Health are focusing on getting vaccines to shelters and to other areas where people experiencing homelessness are, as well as to affordable housing units. So we got lots of other things planned. If there's anything I can do to support any of you, or you have any questions, please let me know.
Before you stop, Shelley, tell us a little bit about the celebration around us being like the 4th best county in the nation, or metro in the nation.
Yeah, that was awesome news. So for those of you that may not know what Jim's referring to, there was a study done and was published that our Olympia, Lacey, Tumwater metro area is the 4th best in the entire nation in terms of our COVID response and COVID rates. So that's just really great news. I'm really proud of our whole entire community for that.
Yeah, talk about a team effort. Congratulations to everyone involved. Huge.
Thank you.
Questions for Shelley? Just, I think the message to our community is keep up the good work, but don't let up on the gas pedal, right? JW?
Yeah, Shelley, what was the criteria for that? Are they the number of vaccines per capita, or how'd they come up with 4th?
You know, that one was not related to vaccines. That was related to COVID cases and some other factors. So I don't know the exact details, but that story was published in the Olympian, I think 2 days ago, and there's a link to the research article on that. And I think that's also available on our website as well, if you'd like more information.
Good question.
Our whole county is doing well, though. I just do want to say that compared to the rest of the state and counties of similar size, Thurston County is doing great in all areas that we can control, best we can given the circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Carolyn?
Shelley, despite all that good work, if you want to say good work, are you at all worried with the rise that we've been seeing in numbers that the governor's going to kick us back a level?
Yes, we're all worried about that. I referenced May 3rd. We are assessed for what phase that we are in every 3 weeks. And so the next assessment date is May 3rd. And I believe the governor's got a press conference planned tomorrow to do some forecasting, I think, or maybe, don't know exactly what the message is going to be, probably to Washington to please take this seriously and do everything that we can, because the rates have not been good, not just for us, but for all counties in the state. But we have to fail 2 metrics in order to roll back from phase 3 to phase 2. That is, we need less than 15 new hospitalizations for COVID in the last 7 days. And then our case rate needs to be below 200 over the last 14 days for our population. We are not meeting the hospital metric right now, and we're just a little bit under for the case rate right now. So we'll see how things go in the next several days in terms of our case trends.
So follow up on that, Shelley, is the school's ability to go to 4 days a week tied to that phase at all, or would that plan continue forward?
Schools are not tied to the roadmap to recovery phases. However, what schools are tied to is that case rate number. And so if we hit the 200 mark, then that would mean that middle and high school students that are currently able to be in person with 3 feet of physical distancing would have to revert back to 6 feet of physical distancing and maintain their cohorts, which would mean that most of our local schools couldn't physically accommodate as many students at the same time. So they would likely have to pull back and implement more of a hybrid approach. But in my conversation with the superintendents this morning about that, we want the community to know that if that does happen and we do get to the 200 case rate, the intent behind that is to keep kids in school rather than having to shut down large groups of kids that are in close contact in those schools. So it helps to maintain, to keep more kids in school rather than having to quarantine whole entire classrooms or blocks or school buildings.
Thank you. Anything else for Shelley? Well, huge congratulations and hugs to you and your team and all of us for keeping pressure on our neighbors and families to do the right thing. So anything else for the good of the order? Okay, we're adjourned, everyone. Have a good rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.